High above the frozen expanse of the Arctic Circle, a massive silver machine cuts through the thin atmosphere. The year is 1962, and the world stands on the precipice of nuclear annihilation. Inside the pressurized cabin of the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, 6 men sit in tense silence, surrounded by dials and analog gauges. They are the tip of the spear for the United States Strategic Air Command. Their mission is simple yet terrifying, as they must loiter at the edge of Soviet airspace, waiting for a command that everyone prays will never come. The drone of the 8 Pratt & Whitney turbojet engines is the only sound that fills the void. The pilot checks his instruments while scanning the dark horizon, where the sun struggles to rise over the polar ice caps. This is Operation Chrome Dome, a continuous airborne alert program designed to ensure that America retains the ability to strike back even if its bases are destroyed. These men have been flying for hours, and fatigue is a constant enemy that they must battle with caffeine and sheer willpower. In the belly of this aluminum giant rests a payload capable of leveling entire cities and changing the course of human history in a single flash of light. The weight of this responsibility presses down on their shoulders like the gravity forces during a steep turn. Every sudden crackle of the radio sends a jolt of adrenaline through the crew as they anticipate the go code. They know that if they receive that specific sequence of alphanumeric characters, they will turn their nose toward the Soviet Union and unleash hell on Earth. There is no room for error and no second chances in this high-stakes game of nuclear poker. The B-52 Stratofortress is not just an airplane in this moment, but the ultimate arbiter of life and death. It is a flying fortress designed to penetrate the most heavily defended airspace in the world and deliver a message of absolute destruction. The stakes could not be higher for the United States and its allies during the height of the Cold War. The Soviet Union had developed its own nuclear arsenal, and the threat of a surprise attack was a daily reality for millions of Americans. Policymakers in Washington District of Columbia knew that the only way to prevent a third world war was to convince the enemy that an attack would result in immediate and total retaliation. This doctrine, known as mutually assured destruction, relied entirely on the credibility of the delivery systems. If the bombers could not reach their targets, the deterrent was worthless. General Curtis LeMay, the commander of the Strategic Air Command, understood this reality better than anyone else. He was a hard-nosed pragmatist who had orchestrated the firebombing campaigns against Japan during World War II. LeMay demanded a bomber that could fly faster and higher than anything the Soviets could put in the sky. He wanted a machine that could carry the heaviest nuclear weapons over intercontinental distances without refueling if necessary. The existing propeller-driven bombers like the B-36 Peacemaker were becoming obsolete in the face of rapid advancements in jet fighter technology. If the United States failed to field a superior long-range bomber, the balance of power would shift dangerously toward the Soviet Union. The fear was that the Soviets might believe they could win a nuclear war if they struck first and eliminated the American bomber fleet on the ground. The B-52 had to be the answer to this existential threat. It had to be durable enough to fly around the clock and advanced enough to outrun or outsmart Soviet defenses. The survival of the Western world depended on the engineering marvel that was taking shape on the drafting tables at the Boeing company. The protagonist of this story is not a single man, but the machine itself and the visionary engineers who brought it to life. In 1948, the United States Air Force issued a requirement for a new heavy bomber. Boeing initially proposed a design that looked like a larger version of their World War II bombers with straight wings and turboprop engines. However, during a fateful meeting at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Air Force officers told the Boeing team that turboprops were not good enough. They needed a pure jet aircraft to meet the future demands of aerial warfare. Ed Wells, the chief engineer at Boeing, and his team retreated to their hotel room in Dayton, Ohio for the weekend. In a legendary feat of engineering prowess, they completely redesigned the aircraft in less than 48 hours. They scrapped the straight wings and turboprops in favor of a sleek swept wing design powered by 8 turbojet engines mounted in pods under the wings. They worked non-stop using balsa wood from a local hobby shop to build a scale model of their new vision. When they presented the proposal on Monday morning, they handed the Air Force the future of strategic bombing. The result was the B-52, a technological leap that defied the conventions of the time. The aircraft featured a unique bicycle landing gear arrangement because the wings were too thin to house the main wheels. The wings themselves were a marvel of flexibility, capable of flexing up to 32 feet at the tips during flight. This flexibility allowed the massive plane to ride out turbulence at high speeds and low altitudes. The sheer size of the aircraft was staggering, with a wingspan of 185 feet and a length of nearly 160 feet. When the prototype finally took to the skies in 1952, with test pilot Tex Johnston at the controls, it roared with a power that shook the ground. The 8 engines left a trail of black smoke that would become the signature of the B-52 for decades to come. The pilots reported that the aircraft handled surprisingly well for its size, responding to control inputs with the grace of a much smaller plane. The Air Force was impressed and ordered the B-52 into immediate production. It was officially named the Stratofortress, continuing the lineage of the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-29 Superfortress. As the B-52 entered service with the Strategic Air Command, it fundamentally changed the culture of the military aviator. Bases were built or expanded across the northern tier of the United States to house these behemoths. The crews lived in alert facilities, often sleeping in their flight suits, ready to sprint to their aircraft at the sound of a klaxon. The motto of the Strategic Air Command was "Peace is our profession," but everyone knew that their profession required them to be ready for war at a moment's notice. The B-52 became the physical embodiment of American resolve. The early models of the B-52 featured a tall tail fin and a rear turret gunner who sat in a pressurized compartment in the tail. These gunners were the eyes in the back of the head for the crew scanning for enemy fighters. The interior of the bomber was cramped and noisy, dominated by the whine of the electrical systems and the roar of the engines. The pilot and co-pilot sat side by side on the upper deck, while the navigator and radar navigator sat in a dark compartment below known as the black hole. The electronic warfare officer sat behind the pilots, facing backward. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the B-52 fleet grew in numbers and capability. The introduction of the KC-135 Stratotanker allowed the bombers to refuel in mid-air, extending their range indefinitely. Aerial refueling became a delicate ballet performed at 500 miles per hour as the massive bomber maneuvered behind the tanker to connect with the flying boom. This capability meant that the B-52 could strike any target on the globe and return to base. The global reach of the United States Air Force was now absolute. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the B-52 to the forefront of global attention. As President John Fitzgerald Kennedy negotiated with the Soviet leadership, General LeMay ordered the Strategic Air Command to disperse the bomber fleet to civilian airports and keep a large portion of the force airborne. Dozens of B-52 bombers loaded with thermonuclear weapons circled outside Soviet borders, waiting for the order to attack. It was the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war, and the B-52 was the heavy hammer held over the head of the Soviet premier. While designed for nuclear war, the B-52 would see its most extensive combat use dropping conventional bombs. As the United States became embroiled in the Vietnam War, the Air Force needed a platform to deliver massive firepower against enemy supply lines and troop concentrations. The B-52 was modified to carry dozens of 500-pound and 750-pound iron bombs. This new mission was code-named Operation Arclight. The aircraft that was built to destroy cities was now being used to turn jungles into moonscapes. Flying from bases in Guam and Thailand, the B-52 crews flew long missions to strike targets in North and South Vietnam. The psychological effect of a B-52 strike was devastating. The enemy on the ground would often not hear the planes approaching as they flew at high altitudes. The first sign of an attack was the ground erupting in a continuous line of explosions that lasted for seconds but felt like hours. The sheer volume of explosives delivered by a 3-ship formation of B-52 bombers could obliterate a box measuring 1 mile long and half a mile wide. The Vietnam War also exposed the vulnerabilities of the Stratofortress. The North Vietnamese employed Soviet-made surface-to-air missiles known as SAMs, which posed a deadly threat to the high-flying bombers. The electronic warfare officers aboard the B-52 had to work frantically to jam the enemy radar and deploy countermeasures. The duels between the B-52 jammers and the SAM operators became a high-tech game of cat and mouse. Despite their size, the big bombers proved to be surprisingly tough, often returning to base with severe battle damage. The climax of the B-52 experience in Vietnam came during Operation Linebacker II in December 1972. In an effort to force the North Vietnamese back to the negotiating table, President Richard Nixon ordered a massive bombing campaign against Hanoi and Haiphong. Wave after wave of B-52 bombers struck strategic targets at night, braving the most concentrated air defense network in history. 15 B-52s were shot down and many crewmen were killed or captured, but the operation achieved its political goals. The B-52 had proven it could fight in a conventional war. After Vietnam, the B-52 faced a new challenge, which was the march of time. Newer and faster bombers like the B-1 Lancer and the stealthy B-2 Spirit were being developed to replace the aging Stratofortress. Critics argued that the B-52 was a dinosaur, a relic of a bygone era that could not survive in a modern high-threat environment. However, the B-52 possessed one quality that the newer planes lacked, which was versatility. The massive airframe could be adapted to carry almost any weapon in the inventory. The Air Force upgraded the B-52 with new avionics and the ability to carry air-launched cruise missiles. This allowed the bomber to stand off outside the range of enemy defenses and launch precision strikes from hundreds of miles away. The B-52 evolved from a high-altitude gravity bomber into a sophisticated missile truck. The iconic silver paint scheme gave way to camouflage and later to a dark gray coating designed to reduce its visual signature. The dinosaur was evolving to survive in a changing world. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the B-52 was called into action once again for Operation Desert Storm. In the opening hours of the conflict, 7 B-52GS took off from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana on a secret mission. They flew non-stop to the Middle East, launched cruise missiles at Iraqi power grids and communications centers, and returned to the United States. This 35-hour round-trip mission was the longest combat sortie in the history of aviation, at the time proving the global reach of the Stratofortress. During the Gulf War, the B-52 dropped roughly 40% of all the weapons delivered by coalition forces. They pounded the Iraqi Republican Guard positions with unguided bombs, demoralizing the enemy troops. Iraqi prisoners later revealed that the B-52 strikes were the thing they feared the most. The psychological impact of the heavy bomber was as potent in the desert as it had been in the jungles of Vietnam. The Buff, as the crews affectionately called the plane, had secured its place in modern warfare. The B-52 continued to serve in the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq following the attacks of September 11th. In the mountains of Tora Bora, the B-52 demonstrated a new capability by providing close air support for special operations forces on the ground. Using advanced targeting pods and laser-guided bombs, the bomber crews could hit specific caves and bunkers with pinpoint accuracy. The idea of a heavy bomber acting as a sniper in the sky would have been unthinkable to the engineers who designed it in the 1950s. As the 21st century progressed, a strange phenomenon began to occur within the Air Force. The pilots flying the B-52 were often younger than the aircraft they were commanding. It became possible for a grandfather, a father, and a son to have all flown the same specific airframe during their military careers. The B-52 had outlived the B-58 Hustler, the FB-111 Aardvark, and was even outlasting the B-1 Lancer in terms of reliability and cost-effectiveness. The old workhorse simply refused to retire. The maintenance crews who work on the B-52 are the unsung heroes of this story. Keeping a 70-year-old aircraft airworthy requires a tremendous amount of skill and dedication. Spare parts are often no longer manufactured, and and must be scavenged from the boneyard in Arizona or custom-made in machine shops. The maintainers battle leaking hydraulic fluid, aging wiring, and corroded metal to ensure that the Stratofortress is ready for its next mission. Their labor of love keeps the heart of the beast beating. The question that aviation experts and historians have asked for decades is simple. How long can the B-52 Stratofortress continue to fly? Every time the Air Force announces a plan to retire the fleet, a new conflict or a new requirement arises that only the B-52 can fulfill. It has survived budget cuts, political shifts, and technological revolutions. It stands as a testament to the philosophy of building things to last and the adaptability of a robust design. The reveal of the answer lies in the latest Air Force modernization programs. Boeing and the Air Force are currently in the process of re-engineering the B-52 fleet with modern Rolls-Royce engines. This upgrade, along with a new digital cockpit and radar system, will extend the service life of the Stratofortress into the 2050s. This means that the B-52 will likely serve for a full century, a feat that is unparalleled in the history of military aviation. By the time the last B-52 is finally retired, it will have flown for 100 years. It will have seen the rise and fall of the Soviet Union, the dawn of the Internet age, and the exploration of Mars. It will have carried nuclear weapons, gravity bombs, cruise missiles, and hypersonic weapons. The aircraft that was designed on a weekend in a hotel room in Dayton, Ohio, will have outlived nearly every other machine of its era. It is the ultimate survivor. The B-52 Stratofortress remains a potent symbol of American power projection. When a crisis erupts anywhere in the world, the deployment of B-52 bombers to the region sends an unmistakable message. It reminds adversaries that the United States possesses the capability to strike hard and fast. The silhouette of the swept wings and the 8 engines is recognized globally as an icon of the Cold War that never truly ended. It is a flying museum piece that can still deliver a knockout punch. As we look back at the history of this incredible machine, we see more than just aluminum and rivets. We see the bravery of the crews who flew into the teeth of enemy defenses. We see the brilliance of the engineers who solved impossible problems. We see the dedication of the maintainers who kept the fleet airborne. The B-52 is a living, breathing chronicle of the last 70 years of geopolitical history. It serves as a reminder of the cost of freedom and the vigilance required to maintain it. In the end, the B-52 Stratofortress is not just a bomber but a legend. It has transcended its original purpose to become a cultural icon. It has appeared in movies, songs, and books representing the terrifying might of modern warfare. Yet for the crews who fly it, the B-52 is simply the office. It is a noisy, cramped, and smelly place where they do their job with professionalism and pride. They are the guardians of the legacy. The roar of the B-52 taking off is a sound that shakes the chest and rattles the windows. It is the sound of 8 jet engines burning thousands of pounds of fuel per minute. It is the sound of raw, unadulterated power. As the heavy bird lifts off the runway and climbs into the sky, it carries with it the ghosts of the past and the hopes of the future. It is a sight that never fails to inspire awe. From the frozen Arctic to the burning deserts of the Middle East, the B-52 has cast its shadow over every corner of the globe. It has been a deterrent, a warrior, and a protector. It has fulfilled the vision of General Curtis LeMay and the engineers at Boeing beyond their wildest dreams. It has proven that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The B-52 is the big stick that Theodore Roosevelt spoke of, and it is still being carried softly. As the sun sets on another day at Minot Air Force Base or Barksdale Air Force Base, the B-52s sit silently on the ramp. Their dark gray skins cool in the evening air. They are waiting for the next call, the next mission, the next chapter in their long history. They are the watchers on the wall, the sentinels of the sky. And as long as there are threats to the nation, the B-52 will be there ready to answer the call. The legacy of the B-52 Stratofortress will endure long after the last airframe is chopped up for scrap. It will be studied by future generations of engineers and historians as the pinnacle of 20th century industrial design. It will be remembered as the plane that kept the peace by being ready for war. Until that final day comes, the Buff flies on defying time and gravity, a timeless warrior in an ever-changing world.